the timing is really good for me to come. Well, as you already know, the Civil War was a bitter struggle. It lasted almost exactly 4 years, from April of 1861 until April of 1865. The experts like to argue about the different causes of the Civil War, and there are a lot of them. Some people focus on something called states' rights. Maybe you've talked about that. The notion that states should have as much power, or maybe even more power, than the federal government. And that was a prevailing view, especially in the southern states. Okay? States' rights. Some people like to focus on bickering over trade and tariff regulations. Should there be taxes on goods coming into the country? If so, how high should they be? Should there be taxes on goods going out of the country, and so on? Okay? Some people focus on that. And there are lots of causes that we could talk about. But when you examine these causes for the Civil War, one way or another, they always trace back to one central issue, and that was slavery, right? One way or another, it almost always came back to slavery. Now, slavery was not the main cause at the beginning. It wasn't at the outset, but eventually it pretty much became a struggle over whether we were going to continue to allow some people in our country to own other people in our country. Now, to you and me, that sounds ridiculous. But 150, 160 years ago, that was a very important issue, whether slavery was going to be allowed to continue or not. And if so, under what conditions, and so on. The Civil War was a bloodbath. There were more Americans killed in the Civil War, when you count civilians and military personnel. More Americans died in the Civil War than all of our other wars put together. And if you challenge that, all you have to do is go home this afternoon and start Googling. Get yourself a piece of paper and a pencil. Okay, how many Americans died in the Revolutionary War? How many died in the War of 1812? The Spanish-American War, World War I, World War II, Vietnam, Korean War, Desert Storm. You add them all up, and it will not be even close. Okay? And there are some important reasons for that. 3 main ones. One, medical science was not very advanced in the 1860s. And so a lot of people were dying of wounds and illnesses and infections that would not kill you or me. So medical science was not very advanced. Second reason, weaponry was becoming more advanced. We were figuring out better and better ways to kill one another. Okay? Cannons were being able to fire more accurately. Cannons were being fired at a greater distance. They were figuring out how to splatter cannon. It's called canister. And instead of killing 2 guys, when a solid cannonball hits, it explodes and splatters shrapnel, and lots of people die as a result. Weaponry, like a gun that I'm going to be showing you a little bit later here, was becoming pretty sophisticated. This is called a Henry repeating rifle. And we'll talk about that. So weaponry was becoming pretty sophisticated. The third major reason was the strategies that were being used by the commanding officers were not very good. They were trying to use strategies that had been very successful in the past, especially the Mexican War, okay, only 15, 20 years earlier, okay? And the tactics that were being used on the battlefields back then were pretty good, but when you figure the sophisticated weaponry that was available in 1861, 1862, those kind of strategies were not working very well. I'm going to give you one example. When a battle began, almost immediately there was a heavy bluish-gray haze that settled over the field. And that's because guns like this were using black grain gunpowder, very smoky. The cannons and the mortar, they were using black grain gunpowder, very smoky and noisy. And so you had this haze sitting over the field, and it was hard to see. Commanding officer is going to send all of you guys, with me as your leader, across the open field, and because it's hard for you to hear and see me, the commanding officer says, okay, bunch in tight so you can hear my commands, and you can see me, follow the flag, here we go. And we're all packed up close together. not good, okay? Because when a lead slug like this came sailing our way, it might miss me, but it might hit one of you, because you're behind me. Or it's intended for you, and it might miss you, but it hits me, because we're almost shoulder to shoulder advancing across this open field. And that happened over and over again. Adjustments were not being made. They didn't have the walkie-talkies or things that we have today to communicate, and so they tended to bunch up as they went across fields and so on. Okay, so for those reasons, the lists of casualties were very high.
Yeah.
Okay, Civil War begins. The bombardment of Fort Sumter, April 12, 1861. Immediately, Abraham Lincoln, President of the United States, he makes a call for volunteers, and they get slammed at the recruiting stations. They've got more people coming in to volunteer than they can handle. They don't have enough guns and equipment, and so they're actually turning some people away, turning a lot of people away. In the South, the President of the Confederate States of America, Jefferson Davis, he makes a call for volunteers. Same thing. They get overwhelmed at the recruiting stations. Why? People were excited. They were looking at this as an adventure. Nobody had been killed yet. Okay, and so you had a lot of young guys, and especially in their late teens, early 20s, and they were signing up for the wrong reasons in many cases. Hey, everybody says this is going to be a short war. We're very confident of victory. We're going to be soldiering for maybe a month, 2 months tops. They're going to give me a nice uniform and a shiny gun. We're going to go out and slap the enemy around a little bit, and they're going to give up very quickly, and I'm going to come back a war hero. In my hometown, they're going to have a big parade down Main Street. The band will be playing in my honor. I'm going to have sparkly medallions and medals on my jacket, and they're going to have this great big celebration in my honor because I'm a war hero. The girls have come rushing up to meet me because they want to meet a war hero. And unfortunately, that's the way a lot of young men were thinking, okay? And so they were signing up by the thousands, okay? They had no trouble at first getting people to sign up. Now later, as the war dragged on, and instead of taking a month or two, it took 4 long years. And as you can imagine, it got harder to get people to sign up, okay? And after a while, especially in the South, where manpower was a real critical problem, they were signing up people your age and my age. They had people 66 years old like me running around with guns, okay? So they were hurting for manpower later on. But early on, lots of excitement. Okay, what was the young recruit like? Well, I already told you he was young. The average guy was in his late teens, early 20s, so average about 20, 21 years old. Average height, the average recruit was about 5'7.5". Why a little bit smaller? Well, you know the reason. Nutrition wasn't quite as good back then. They didn't have the balanced diet that you and I have. And so on average, the guy was about 5'7.5". Now they had their tall guys too and their little guys, okay? Abe Lincoln was 6'4". So they had guys that were 6'3", 6'4", and so forth. They had the people that were smaller than 5'7.5". But on average, that was the height. Average weight, 145 pounds. Let's compare that to me. I got on the scale this morning, and I weighed 176 pounds. Okay, most people I think would say I'm about average height. I'm 5'9". Average weight, about 175, 176. But I'm 30 pounds or more heavier than the average recruit of that day. I'm about 30 pounds heavier than the average recruit. So the reason I tell you that, I want to have you get the idea that these guys were kind of wiry, tended to be kind of slender, fairly athletic and strong because a lot of them had physical labor and farmers and factory workers. So they were pretty fit people, okay? But they were just a little bit smaller than the average person of today. Okay. When a guy came in, they ran some tests to see if he was fit for duty. First thing they did, pop his mouth open. They wanted to get a really good look at his teeth and the health of his gums. Almost like checking out a horse before you buy it, okay? I'm not going to explain why they checked the teeth, but you're going to figure that on your own here in just a few minutes. Next thing they did was they wanted to check and see if he had good legs. And so they had him do deep squats, 4 or 5 of those, see if he could get back up again, okay? Why? because they didn't have trucks and jeeps and all that kind of stuff. Most of the time, guys were either marching or running. So you had to have good wheels, okay? And they were checking through the knees, hips, and ankles, okay? Next thing they did was they would have the guy climb a rope. Most of the recruiting stations had a big fat rope, and they'd tell the guy, without using your legs, we want to check for your upper body strength, let's see if you can climb this rope. If they didn't have a rope, they'd have the guy do some push-ups. Then they had a doctor, or somebody pretending to be a doctor, come in, and they would check the eyes to make sure that the white of the eyes were really white. If there was a yellowish tint, they rejected it, because yellow tint, where it's supposed to be clear white, that indicates kidney problems, liver problems, things like that. So they didn't want to mess with it, because you're going to be in trouble later on. Okay? If you could pass those simple tests, you were allowed to sign up. A lot of guys lied about their age. Some of the guys were 16, 17. Record keeping was lousy back then. But again, the average was about 19, 20, 21. If you were accepted, they started handing you gear. One of the first things they gave you was a cap. You'll notice it looks sort of like a baseball cap, but it's kind of flattened out on top, and it's got a brass emblem on it. This is called a kepi. As vocabulary terms here. Kepi, it's a French term. You'll notice that there is a bugle mounted on top of this kepi. About 90% of the Civil War soldiers had a bugle on top of their cap, because almost everybody was a foot soldier. They were in the infantry. Okay? If you were a horse soldier, you were in the cavalry, they gave you a kepi that looked like this. You'll notice it's got cross sabers on it. And they were kind of elite. They got better equipment, better food, better uniform. We're going to take a look at a cavalry uniform here in just a minute. The kepi was either worn flat out like this, or they could telescope it like this. Okay? There's a chin strap. Guys going 15, 20 miles an hour in a gallop, they'd use the chin strap so they wouldn't lose their cap. What's this called again? Kepi, that's right. Thank you, I keep forgetting. All right. Some guys in the West preferred a slouch hat like this. We'll talk more about that later. You notice it's got a kind of a wide brim on it. It looks a little bit different. In addition to a cap, they would give guys some pretty nice boots. They were called brogans. Nice, high-quality leather. Okay, it was a tie-type boot, and that was troublesome for some guys because some guys didn't know how to tie shoes because they wore moccasins and things like that. And sometimes it was the very first tie shoe they ever saw. Okay, so but they were good leather. The downside was they were in such a hurry to make these. They had to make hundreds of thousands of them. Okay, and so they would stamp them in the factories. Bang, bang. They were cut like cookie cutter. They're cutting leather, and they didn't have time to mess with right foot, left foot. Like when you go to the store, they try to make an effort to conform it to the right foot or left foot. Not in the Civil War. They were all the same. And so as you can imagine, they were kind of uncomfortable because there was no such thing as a left boot or right boot. Then they were issued a weapon. Most of the guys got a musket, very much like this. There were almost 300,000 of these made. Okay? 270-some thousand of these were made. It's called a Springfield muzzle loader. Okay? It's a musket. By muzzle loader, that means all the material goes down the muzzle. Okay? Now, a lot of the things I'm showing you today are replica items, like my jacket is not real. It looks real. They try to make it as real as possible, but it's not. My skillet is a replica item. My tin cup is a replica item. But this is the real thing. Okay? This was made at Harper's Ferry Arsenal, 1845, right? Okay. So this was manufactured in 1845, and the Springfield Company had two arsenals, one in Massachusetts, one in Virginia. This one was made in Virginia. About 16 years before the Civil War started, it probably sat on a rack for a while, and then when hostilities broke out, they handed it to somebody. I don't know who. Record keeping was lousy. All I do know is that it was picked up later on at the Battle of Shiloh by a guy from Indiana, and he broke the law and he took it home. He probably used it at home after the war to hunt rabbits and squirrels, things like that. Then he sold it to a rich guy from DeKalb, Illinois, a lawyer, and then about 35 years ago it came into my possession. So, Now, I've been criticized by some people why Barry, a musket like that should be in a museum. And they're probably right. But I wanted you to see it up close. A piece of American history, it's the real thing. Okay? It weighs about 10 pounds. It's kind of heavy. There's an attachment. When you first walked in, you saw me. I had the bayonet. We'll talk more about that later that attaches to it. And so typically guys carried a musket like this. Okay? As the war went on, there were some improvements made. They started putting grooves on the inside of the barrel so that the bullet would spin. That makes it more accurate. Okay? I thought it might be worthwhile to take a minute for me to explain how this is loaded. Okay? Let's say that I'm out in a battle. It's been fired. I don't have time to stop and clean it and spit on a piece of cloth and put it down in there to get the sparks out. If I'm hunting squirrels and rabbits, I do that for safety. Middle of battle, you have not got time. You're trying to stay alive, okay? And so you just fire one shot after the other. I fired my gun, bang. Now it's time to reload, okay? The first thing they did was they reached into this leather box and they pulled out something like this, made out of paper, okay? It's called a cartridge. And this is called a cartridge box. I've got about 35 or 40 of these in here. They make them in factories, okay? I pull that out. First thing I do is with my teeth, I bite the tail and I spit it out. That's why they checked for the teeth. You had to be able to bite that tail off because they found out it was faster to not do it with two hands. Better to do it with one hand. Bite it and spit it out. And the reason you bit the tail off is at the top, 3/4 of the cartridge is black grain gunpowder. At the very base, at the bottom of the cartridge, is a lead ball, either round or kind of cone-shaped, called a mini ball. Okay? So that resides in the bottom. And so I bite the tail off, spit it out, I dump that black grain gunpowder down the barrel, and it trickles all the way down to the base of the barrel, right here. Then, with my fingers, I take out the lead ball, the mini ball, I put that down the barrel. Now all I've got left in my hand is a piece of paper. I wad that up, now it's called a patch, and I stuff that paper down there because we want all that to go down to the end, and also if it's raining or if it's real humid, we don't want moisture to get down in the barrel and moisten that gunpowder because then it's worthless, okay? Then, I've got all that stuff down in the muzzle, and now I take this out. This is called a ramrod. You'll notice it's right underneath the barrel. You'll notice it's fat on this end, okay? I take my ramrod out, I spin it, I put that down in there, and then bang, bang, I really bang it tight because I want that lead to grab the sides of the barrel, okay? I don't want any vapors or sparks or anything to get out, and that gun might blow up in my face. So it's got to be nice and tight, okay? And that's another reason why you put that patch in there, okay? Then I take the ramrod out and put it away. Now in the excitement of battle, sometimes the guys forgot to take the ramrod out. They fire their gun. There goes their ramrod and they are out of business, okay? They can't load their gun anymore, okay? And that did happen once in a while. So we're going to go ahead and take the ramrod out, put it away. What's this called again? Ramrod. Thank you. All right, we're half done loading. Then I half cock the hammer, and I no longer do this because there's a real tight iron spring in here, and I've been told by a couple of gunsmiths that I'm going to break it if I keep doing it. So we're going to use our imagination. I'll pull that thing back. I reach into my cartridge box again, and this time, instead of a paper cartridge, I pull out a brass cap. Inside that brass cap is a substance called fulminate of mercury, okay? And I mount that on a little iron tube. There's a little metal tube here, it's hollow. I mount that on there, I full cock the hammer, and when I pull the trigger, that hammer comes down and taps on top of that cartridge. It ignites that fulminate of mercury, and that flame travels down through that hollow tube and ignites the rest of the gunpowder, and it comes flying out of there, okay? And that mini ball comes out with no spin on it. And that's because it's smooth on the inside. Remember I said it's smooth bore, okay? That means there's no grooving, no rifling on the inside of the barrel. And that's bad, because when that mini ball comes out, as it moves away from the gun, little by little, it starts to dart and weave unpredictably. If it had spin on it, it would hold its true line, and it would be accurate at maybe 200 yards or 250 yards. But as it is, because it comes out with no spin, it's only accurate about half the length of a football field, about 50 yards. Okay? That's not too good. It's very similar to a baseball pitcher by the name of R.A. Dickey. Raise your hand if you've heard of R.A. Dickey. Okay. R.A. Dickey, major league pitcher, he hurt his arm, he was having trouble getting batters out, and so he taught himself how to throw a knuckleball. He would dig, he still does, he digs his fingernails into the leather, and then he throws the ball, and the idea is to try to take the spin off of it, and that ball darts and weaves like this, and fools the batter, and the batter swings and the ball moves. Even R.J. Dickey doesn't know where the ball's going to go. Okay, it's kind of unpredictable. Same principle here. And so, unfortunately, because these muskets were not very accurate, this is what happened. In a battle, if the enemy is close by, the commanding officer would say, "Fire at will." And that means train on a target, try to hit it. But if the enemy was at a great distance, the commanding officer would say, "Okay, guys, load your guns, line up shoulder to shoulder, we're all going to fire at once. And I'm going to try to send a wall of lead across the field and try to hit something." Okay? Unfortunately, when you put people shoulder to shoulder like that, now they're easy targets. The cannonball hits, splatters, shrapnel, and you kill 17 guys instead of 2. Okay? So there again, poor battlefield's technique that was used. Okay. We're going to set the musket aside here for a little bit. Is buried in Marion, South Marion. After the Civil War, he went to work for the railroad, and that's how he ended up in Marion. Died in 1931. Okay, so he had a long life, and fortunately, he was interviewed by newspapermen. And I was able to get my hands on 2 newspaper articles about Louis Baker. I took notes, and I was able to take the things that he talked about, like he mentioned, he talked about getting shot, and things like that. And so I was able to weave that into the presentation I have for you today. I tell you this because I don't want you to get the idea that I just sat at home and made all this up. Okay? The things that I'm about to share with you, these are things that Louis Baker said about his own experiences during the Civil War. I'm going to step aside for a second. When I come back, I'm not Barry Grove from Iowa anymore. I'm Louis Baker. Howdy, folks. My name is Louis Baker. I grew up in a place called Covington, Kentucky, and we had us a little place a little south of the Ohio River, about 8 miles south of the river in Kentucky. And my ma, she was a full-blood Cherokee Indian, so I'm half Indian. And my pa, he was Irish. He was an Irishman. And he was a tobacco farmer. He was a tobacco man. And we had us 19 slaves on our farm. 4 of the slaves was full-grown man slaves. And we had 4 full-grown woman slaves. And then the other 11 was youngins. And they didn't do no work on the tobacco farm until they growed up. Now, when the Civil War busted out, I was 18 years old, and I couldn't wait to sign up. Now, some of my neighbors fought for the North, and some of my neighbors was like me and fought for the South. But most folks just sat it out. They didn't take no side in the war because Kentucky was a border state and was neutral in the war. So, when I signed up, I passed the test.
Excuse the interruption. The football coach.
So when I signed up, they gave me a few things. One thing they gave me was this silly little cap. They called it a kepi. And those of us from Kentucky, we hated the kepi. We just flung him in the bushes. We preferred the slouch hat like I got on him. You'll notice it's got a nice wide brim on it, and it keeps the sun and the rain off of our faces, and we can flip it and put water in it and use it to wash up at the end of the day, or we can use it as a fan to swat skeeters and gnats and flies. And so we done that too. Now, they give us these here boots. They called them Brogans, and it's a high-quality boot, but a couple problems with it. One, it's all cut the same. No such thing as a right or left. And so it was kind of uncomfortable. The other thing was, a lot of the fellas that come in and signed up, they come in barefoot or in moccasins. They never owned no shoes, and so they didn't know how to tie them. And I spent a lot of time showing fellas how to tie a shoe. Now, the boot, as I said, was not very comfortable, and so what I done was I took my knife and I put a notch here in the back of this one, and then each morning I just made sure that I put this one over here and this one over here so I could gradually break them in, and after a while they wasn't too bad, and they was fairly comfortable. Now, I was in quite a few dust-ups. I fought at the Battle of Chickamauga, and I fought at the Battle of Lookout Mountain, and I fought in a dust-up not too far south of here, down in Missouri. We was along the Tarkio River, and me and a bunch of other Rebs, Reb is short for rebel, we was on the south side of the Tarkio River, and we was firing across at a bunch of Yanks. Yank is short for Yankee or Northerner, and so we was firing back and forth at one another, and then, after a while, somebody yelled, "Low!" I never heard that before, and a feller explained it to me. He said, when we have a low, that means it's a quiet time, and everybody gives their word they won't fire their gun at nobody. And at first, I was kind of scared. I wasn't sure people would keep their word. If I get out in the open, somebody might take a pot shot at me. But everybody kept their word. And I think that might be because we was all Americans. Even though we was fighting one another, we was still Americans. I don't know if you could pull that off today. In places where your troops are, and say, okay, everybody promise don't do no shooting for 15 minutes. I don't know if people keep their word. But again, I think it was because we was all Americans. And so it gave us a chance to look after our killed, and look after our wounded, and it gave us a chance to get a little bite to eat. And then a fellow on the far side of the river yelled, "Hey, Reb, you got any tobacco?" This fella next to me said, "Well, yeah, I got tobacco. You got any coffee?" And don't you know, within a couple of minutes, me and this other fella, we was wading out into the river, and coming at us the other way was a couple of Yanks, and we stood in the middle of the river, and we made us a trade. And they got the tobacco that they couldn't get, and we got the coffee that we couldn't get, and then we went our separate ways, and within about 3 minutes, we was trying to kill each other again. And I know that sounds like a lot of foolishness, but it's the truth. Now, late in the war, me and my buddy, O.W., we was with other fellas, and we was assigned just east of Atlanta, Georgia, and we got into a dust-up with the Yanks, and I got shot. I got hit in the left ear, and I was a bloody mess, and I thought I was going to die. And they hauled me off, cleaned me up, and once they got me all cleaned up, they could see it was just kind of a notch, where it took a little notch out of my ear, but I was just fine, and so they gave me my musket and sent me back into battle. The following morning, I got shot again. This time I took one pretty good in the back of the hand. They took a mini ball, that lead ball went right into my back of my left hand, and I couldn't use it. And within a day, I had a fever, and there was a red streak traveling up the inside of my wrist, and my hand swelled up like a pumpkin, and I couldn't even move it. And when that fever got a hold of me, and I couldn't even tell them what my name was no more, they took me off to a field hospital. They put me in a tent, and they put me on a cot. And there was a fella nearby that was on a cot. He'd been shot in the leg. I couldn't see nothing, though, because somebody took a rope, and they run it the full length of the tent, and they throwed blankets over that rope to form kind of a partition. And I got curious, because I heard them talking over there, and I peeked between the blankets, and sure enough, here come this doctor. And in one hand, he had a little old knife, and in the other hand, he had a big saw, sawing bone. And right behind that doctor was three of the biggest fellas I ever seen in my life. big guys. And their job was to hold that guy down on the table so he wouldn't move none when they started to saw on that leg. And when that begging and yelling started, I got to thinking, when they're done with him, they're going to come in here and they're going to take my left arm. And if they was to turn me into half a man, my gal friend back home, she might not want me no more. So I run off. I crawl under that tent and I ski down. And I run and I run and I didn't stop until I got to a big old barn, and I hid in that barn for about a week, maybe longer. And that swelling and that fever was grabbing a hold of me. But after a few days, I realized I was one of the lucky ones. My body was fighting off that infection on its own. And after about 6-7 days or so, that swelling went down, that streak went away, my fever went away, and I was beginning to get function back in my left hand to where I could still use it. And once I felt like I was in the clear, I sneaked back into camp and pretended like nothing happened. And of course, I was a deserter. I'd run off without permission. But nobody seemed to notice, and so I just got back into my normal routine, and that was that. Now, about the time my hand was coming back to really feeling pretty good, we got word that Robert E. Lee, the guy on the right there, the top right, Robert E. Lee, the commander, was told that he and his army had surrendered, and we was told that the war was over, and we was licked, we was beat, and we was scared. Because we killed a lot of northern boys, a lot of Yanks we shot and killed, and we was hearing rumors about revenge. One rumor was they was going to line us up in front of a firing squad, and we were going to get shot. Another rumor was that we was all going to be rounded up and ropes put around our neck, and we was all going to get strung up because we fought for the South. Another rumor was we was going to be rounded up, thrown into prison, and left there to rot and die because we fought for the South. But then President Abraham Lincoln stepped in and he said, no. He said, me and the other fellas that fought for the South, we wasn't to be punished in any way, providing we'd done two things. We put down our musket and we signed an official government paper saying that we wouldn't fight no more. And that's what I've done. I throwed down my musket, and somebody showed me where to make my X on that official-looking paper, and me and O.W., my buddy, we walked from Georgia all the way back to Kentucky. It took us pretty near 6 weeks to make that walk. We had to swim 8 and 10 rivers. It's a wonder we didn't drown. But we made it, and that long walk gave me a chance to do some powerful thinking. And I come to believe that there was some good that come out of the Civil War, and there was some bad. One of the bad things was the South was all tore up. Factories was tore up, towns was tore up, railroad track was tore up. When the Northern soldier was marching through the South, he was under orders, if you see food, get rid of it. We're going to starve the Southerners out. And so when they saw a hog, they shot it. And if they couldn't use it, they left it to rot, so nobody could get it. If they saw a cow, they shot it. If they saw a chicken, they wrung its neck. If they couldn't use it, they threw it on the ground, stomped on it, and so it would spoil and nobody could use it for food. If they saw a cornfield, wheat field, burn it. So the Southerners can't use that for food, no, neither. And that strategy worked pretty good, but the South, them that didn't die from wounds, a lot of them got sick and died of illnesses, starvation, and so forth. Another bad thing about the Civil War was Abraham Lincoln, a man that I have to admit, Abe Lincoln, I hated his guts for about 4 years. And then, at the end of the war, what he'd done for me, he didn't have to do it. But when he let me and the others go home free with no punishment, I realized what a good man he really was. And so what happens? He gets shot and killed by an assassin 5 days after the war is over. the South's best friend, shot and killed. With him out of the way, boy, did they stick it to the South. Without him out of the way. There was some good, of course, that come out of the Civil War. One was, and I have to admit, it was best that we got rid of slavery once and for all. Not going to have anybody no more owning somebody else. And secondly, the states got a powerful message. If you don't like a law, if you don't like a federal regulation, you can try to demonstrate, change it, vote in new people to get it changed, but you can't just leave the family because you're ticked off. You can't just leave the union. You got to stay in the family and keep it strong and free. Because freedom ain't free. Sometimes you got to fight for it. I want to thank you folks for your kind attention. I'll leave you with two things. I really appreciate that you don't hold nothing against me for shooting at them Iowa boys. There weren't no hate in it. I was just a young fella, scared and trying to stay alive one more day. And secondly, after lying down yonder all these years, I have to say, it sure is nice to be remembered. Thank you kindly.